Hey, what's going on, parents and providers? My name is Dr. Andrew Roop. I have the privilege of being a pediatric chiropractor here at Thrive Chiropractic. And I'm so excited to be sharing with you. I'm so excited that you're tuning in right now. Now, maybe you came across this link because you were coming to one of our live workshops and you weren't able to make it, or you had a friend send it to you, or you came across it on our website. Regardless of what led you to us spending some time together here, I actually already know something about you, because the fact that you went to this link, the fact that you registered for the workshop tells me that you care about your kids. You care about making sure that they are at their best. And maybe you're a provider that's caring about the families and the kids that you serve. You want to make sure that there is nothing getting in the way of them reaching their full potential. Man, that little bit that I already know about you tells me that you are in the right place. And it tells me that, man, we've got an important conversation to have about what is going on with our kids and how we can best help them out. Now, let me answer a question I know you have right off the bat. You hear, some of the terms we throw around with the workshop. You maybe saw the title, anxiety, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, autism, chronic immune system challenges. You hear all that and you're thinking, what the heck does that have to do with chiropractic, right? You hear me introduce myself as a chiropractor and you're kind of confused. Listen, I promise that by the end of our time together here, you will see the connection. You will see how intimately related a nervous system focused chiropractic approach is connected to those issues. But honestly, as much as I'm here as a chiropractor, I'm here as a concerned individual, because we've got more and more kids struggling. I think you know that too, right? You know that because otherwise you wouldn't be here. So yes, I'm here. I want to explain, I want to connect the dots from the nervous system and all the science and the nerdy stuff we'll go through, but we're going to do it in a simple to understand, a simple to communicate sort of way, because I don't think you're here just for my opinion. I don't think you're here to have another take or another perspective on stuff. You want the actual why. You want to understand the cause as to these challenges. So although I can't tell you that I understand maybe completely what you're going through as a parent, because I don't have a kiddo struggling in that way, what I can tell you is that we understand how it affects your family. We can understand how these challenges affect everyone, maybe siblings, you and your spouse or your partner. That when you have a kiddo that's limited, when you have a kiddo that's struggling, it affects everyone. So we get it. We live it here at Thrive. We help families with that every single day. And so we know how big of an impact that makes on your life. And we are so excited to help walk you through that and help create a different future trajectory. So let's kind of set the stage a little bit. Let's set the table for what's going on. And I don't think I have to go into this too much, right? I don't think anyone here has the impression that our kids as a whole are doing well, but it might not be even as good as you think it is, right? Because the standard that we've set up for health is really just not sick, right? Hopefully that's not how your brain works, but so many people, if you were to ask them, what does it mean to be healthy? The first thing that comes to mind, even if they're not going to say it out loud, is it's just not sick, right? There's no symptoms, but there is a huge gap between not being sick and truly being healthy. Let me put it to you this way. So my wife and I, Laura, I'll show you a picture of them here in a second on our slides. We've been married for 8 years. We've got 3 amazing boys. And let me flash back almost 8.5 years now to our wedding day. We got married in the summer. It was a beautiful outdoor wedding just down the road here from where grew up in Western Pennsylvania. And man, there's a lot that goes into a wedding. I don't want to fully flash back to there because I might get a little PTSD. But there's a lot of planning, right? There's preparation for flowers. There's wedding dress setup. There's makeup. There's engagement photos, let alone the day of wedding photos. There's hours and hours and so much energy that gets poured into this from a time that, there's a little girl onward. She's been thinking of this day. Now imagine if we get to the perfect day, we get to our beautiful sunny July day, and I'm walking down the aisle, or she's walking down the aisle. I'm at the end there. Our friends and our family are surrounding us. There's music playing. Imagine this perfect, incredible setup that we've been waiting our whole lives for. And she gets down to sit or to look face to face with me, and we look each other in the eyes, and I say, "Oh my goodness, Laura, you look not ugly." Not good, right? You probably either laughed or cringed a little bit here, depending on if you're the guy or the lady listening to this. And you know that that's not the same, right? Not ugly does not equal beautiful, just like healthy does not equal not sick. So there's a gap there, right? Our basic standard for health for our families and our kids is just that they're hanging on, that there's no symptoms. But man, health is so much above and beyond that, let alone where we see a lot of the kiddos that we work with at Thrive that are struggling a degree or two beyond that. And so that belief is really what drives everything we do at Thrive. We believe kids are meant to be healthy, they're meant to be happy, and they're meant to thrive. So let me tell you a little bit, let me introduce you to what we do, and then we're going to jump straight into getting into why kids are struggling so much and what the game plan for today is. So I'm going to share slides here. All right. And what we want to do here is just take a second and introduce, I promised a picture of that wonderful wife and our family, our 3 boys there. And then a few other things on the screen. You'll see myself with Dr. Tony Ebel. That's a big part of our background. It's important for me to communicate and to share how much we care about taking care of our kids and our families that thrive here. And so from day one going into chiropractic school, I knew that taking care of kids is what we were all about. And so we sought out all the additional training, all the extra work from the ICPA and their 200-hour certification program, and Dr. Tony's perfect storm work, digging into scan interpretation and adjustment protocols, and the proficiency certification that just, I guess, a month ago now was completed and accomplished out in Chicago. We have done so much at Thrive to make sure that we are at our best and it can give you and your family the best care. And I don't say all of that to impress you, but rather to impress upon you how much we take this seriously, right? How big of a deal this is for us. Reality is the only thing that a bunch of letters, a bunch of degrees and certifications at the end of someone's name means is that they probably owe other people a lot of money. And that's true, but listen, it's a good investment because we want to give our Thrive families and our kids the best possible care. So that's really been the foundation of Thrive since day one, is family and kid focused care. But our kids are struggling, right? We went through that just a second ago. We're not at that healthy, let alone not sick. And for me, it makes me think back to childhood, and it makes me think back to the simplicity of growing up as a kid. There's basically 2 rules. If you're around my age or that generation, you can remember this, right? Here were the 2 rules. Don't call kids other names. Don't be a bully. Don't be mean. And what was the other one? Don't do drugs. Really a simple life that we lived. And that's all the DARE programs and all that stuff, right? Sadly, these 2 rules have been missed, right? Just a generation, a handful of decades later, boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of names for our kiddos. And we've got an even longer list of drugs to give them for them. And listen, this isn't some anti-medication or anti-drugs conversation, because a lot of the kids that we meet, maybe some of you that are listening, are already at that point. The point is, though, that this is a Band-Aid. This isn't addressing the why, right? There's no one who is struggling with ADHD and taking Concerta or Adderall or Ritalin and who's doing it thinking like, oh, my kid has these focus challenges because there's a deficiency of Concerta in their system. And now, thankfully, that deficiency is addressed and they're not going to have any more issues. Of course, we don't think like that. Thankfully, they help mask the symptoms. They help mask and maybe hide some of the ways that those show up, but it's not addressing the why. And that's what we are obsessed with at Thrive, is answering the why, getting to the cause behind all of these challenges. So we know that this isn't it, right? We know that we've got a long list of labels, of names that don't really tell us why something's happening, and a longer list of treatments that are just going to hide and push that problem on to the future. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to walk through this perfect storm game plan and roadmap to undo it? Well, there's a few steps. 1 is hope, 2 is answers, and 3 is the most important part. It's the action steps. We got to start with hope, because sadly, so many of the people we meet, so many of the families, and maybe this is you tuning in here, you're kind of at the end of your rope, right? We joke that we should answer the phone here at Thrive. Thank you for calling Thrive Chiropractic. Welcome to your last resort, right? Because people are reaching out when they've done everything else. They've tried the detoxes, they've tried nutritional changes or different OT, PT, speech therapies. You've been through the ringer. ABA maybe is one of those too, and you're still stuck. You're still struggling. So we got to explain that there is hope still, that there is possible, that it's possible for your kid's future is better than it is right now. But we're really passionate about not just blowing smoke, not just giving false hope of like pie in the sky, rainbows and unicorns, that everything's going to be wonderful without any substance behind it. And that's where the answers come in. And that's where me, as a weird, nerdy, sciencey sort of dude, loves digging into the stuff, right? I love getting into those nitty gritty details, but I promise this isn't going to be PhD level science. This is going to be basic understanding of connecting the dots of why your kids are struggling. I'm not sure that I'm going to tell you anything you don't already know. I do know we're going to connect it in a new way. We're going to connect the dots and make sense of something that you haven't really thought through before. Because the most common thing I hear from parents after this workshop is some version of this. It goes, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. Why has no one ever told me this before? So hopefully that can be your reaction here at the end of our little time together. And then number 3, Number three is the most important part. We got to do something with this information, right? That phrase, knowledge is power, it's great, but it's incomplete. Knowledge is potential power. It's not until you take action on that knowledge that anything's going to change for your life. So I want to make sure that the last thing we do is give you some action steps, give you some stuff that you can do with this information so that you're not just going home and thinking like, oh, okay, I learned something good, I'm better off for it. You actually have a plan. So first, we've got a quiz for you. So pay attention here. I want you to see if you can answer this question in the video.
This is an awareness test. The answer is 13.
Who got the answer right?
But did you see the moonwalking man?
Now, here's the important question. Let's backtrack. Let's see what's going on here. All right, everyone's hanging out. You're counting your passes, but what did you miss? Coming right here into the middle of the screen, big old bear costume, moonwalking his way across. It's not uncommon that when we're doing this presentation live together, that someone gets the answer right. Honestly, maybe most people get the answer right for those passes, but this part is missed. And that's the key takeaway here is it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. And that's what I just said, right? Nothing that I'm going to tell you here tonight is new information. It's stuff that is mind blowing and that you've never heard it before, or you don't really understand how that could be true. It's just that we're missing it because we're not looking in the right places. So let's jump into everything here. What is the perfect storm? You've heard us use this terminology. Let's walk through what does this perfect storm process look like? We're going to take a little bit of time. We're going to do that. And then I'm going to come back and say, okay, don't just take my word for it. We'll walk through some of those steps that lays out how is it that these things are connected? How is it that one leads to another? Well, more often than not, that perfect storm process starts way back before life even began. It starts back in that wonderful trying to conceive and getting pregnant season of life. Now, for all too many people these days, that's not easy. That's not simple. Thankfully, it still happens. We still have people coming in and they're like, yeah, we just started trying and everything was good. It was awesome. But I'm willing to bet that maybe you yourself or you know someone who struggled to get pregnant. There was a lot of stress involving fertility. That's a whole other rant, a whole other workshop we got as far as, years of birth control and other interventions and how we're messing up ladies' hormones. But take it, all that to say, there's a lot of extra stress that goes into that season of life. And then say we eventually do conceive and say we do get to celebrate this new life growing inside of us. What are we immediately inundated with? If you've been to a baby shower or if you've seen a movie, the book that I think there is even a movie by this title too. I'm not the movie guy, right? It's what to expect when you're expecting, right? You get the book, you see the movie, you get all of this unnecessary information from your friends and family. And my joke about that book, that what to expect when you're expecting, I think it's actually a Stephen King novel, right? Because it's more like a horror story of everything that go wrong during pregnancy. It's not helpful. It's not supportive. It's not empowering. It's not helping you be excited and prepared for this amazing journey that you're going on. Pregnancy and birth should leave moms feeling empowered, should leave them feeling like they can take on the world. Because how amazing is your body that you can create a human and bring them into existence, right? If you can do that, you can do anything. But sadly, that's not how we handle pregnancy. We treat it as this disease that, oh my goodness, you get stamped with pregnancy and then cross your fingers, good luck, hope you make it out the other end alive. And that's not helpful. It's not good. And it's not reality. So, maybe that journey looks like somewhere along the line, you have an ultrasound that's got a little bit of an abnormal or a questionable finding. So now you've got to do extra ultrasounds and then that's extra visits and extra stress. And one thing leads to another. You're not feeling in a good supported place. And then we get to close to the end of that. You're definitely not loving life because, probably not getting adjusted. You're probably not as having prenatal chiropractic as a part of your life. But I'll be honest, listen, even if you're getting adjusted throughout your whole pregnancy, like we do all the time through here, my own wife included, you're not super happy at the end of that journey because you're big and you're ready to be Done. So what happens? Someone's like, hey, well, why don't we just get induced at 39 weeks? Or, oh, that 40-week mark comes, and because we randomly picked a date 9 months ago, now all of a sudden your baby's late and we need to do something. And so there's extra intervention, there's extra pressure, there's extra stress. And every day that goes on seems like there's something wrong. And instead of trusting mom, instead of trusting the process, trusting the body, we intervene and we get in the way of that. In one way or another, most births lead to some sort of intervention. There's some sort of extra help needed, but that help is often not so helpful, and it leads to more challenges. Say we do end up getting induced because labor's stalling out, because maybe we're not able to get in the right positions, or we're not able to have food or the right rest that we need. Or say you are late and the shot clock is ending, and maybe the OB's got a tea time to make, and so we just push that Pitocin in a little bit too soon, and now we start ramping things up, and we're ramping up and we're ramping up, but your body's not ready for it, so it stalls out. Baby gets stressed out, and now this intervention creates another one and another one and another one, and all of a sudden we're ending up in emergency procedures at the end of the road, maybe an emergency C-section, emergency vacuum extraction, forceps, or even the all too common doctor's hands or midwife's hands pulling, turning, twisting that head and neck and that shoulders. You're not able to just do what your body's designed to do. There's stuff getting in the way of that. And thank goodness that we have our providers, right? Please don't hear this as me saying that our midwives, our OBs, our providers are bad people who are just trying to, ignore mom's interests, or they don't care about the health of mom or baby. They're awesome at keeping mama and baby stable and alive and well. But then they're on to the next birth, right? They don't realize there's consequences to these decisions and these actions, because then your pediatrician picks up and they take care of that kiddo. And hopefully you've got a loving, caring, amazing relationship with them. But they don't look back at birth. They don't look back and say, oh, what did that start to life look like? And maybe that's connected to all of your kiddos' early struggles. So there's just a gap, right? It's easy to miss something you're not looking for, because we have this gap between what's happening at birth and then our pediatricians and our other providers picking it up down the road. But anyways, so we have all these extra interventions. We have all this extra stuff happening at birth. And what is that always centered around? Right here, right? That head and neck. We're pulling, we're turning, we're twisting. There's so much extra force taking place right up here. And if you've had a child before, which I'm assuming is the case if you're listening to this, or even if you've held a baby, right? One very, very important thing. Remember back to those first days, you're passing off your little one to Uncle Joe or Grandpa or something, and they want to hold the baby, but they don't really know what they're doing. What do you say? You say, okay, careful with the head, protect the neck, easy, careful. We know that these giant heads and these tiny little bodies can't support themselves yet, but we forget that during birth. And we use this as a lever, and we pull and we turn and we twist. And what does that lead to? The next step. And I'm just going to pull all of these up here. And then what we're going to do is talk through this a little bit more with the screen share off. Because what happens when we have this injury or this damage or this tension in the upper neck is we don't have a very happy little one, right? We've got a stressed, colicky, fussy baby. And that leads to all sorts of more stresses and challenges for parents, because you're just trying to cover from birth and the marathon that you just went through, or maybe even more significant interventions like a C-section. You're trying to catch your breath from that. And all of a sudden you've got a baby who won't calm down. You've got a baby who won't nurse very well, or they're spitting up all the time, or they're constipated and pooping. There's something other than a nice, chill, calm, healthy, happy baby. And listen, I get it. Even the best, most well-behaved, well-adjusted, thriving of kiddos is a lot of work, right? All of our kiddos, I can think back to those days. Our youngest is just over 1 now. They're a lot of work as a newborn, let alone if those challenges are taking place, right? So you're completely fried, you're completely exhausted, and these upper neck stresses and challenges lead to kiddos struggling even more. But what's your advice? What are you told? Well, they'll just grow out of it, right? Reflux, here's a medication that maybe hides the symptoms. Colic, sorry, that, they'll know, they won't do it for more than 6 months. Eventually you'll get through it. Sleep, it's just normal for them to be up all the time. And you're just told to grit your teeth, bear down, and hold your breath, right? You'll make it through eventually. And that's true, right? You're not going to have a 14-year-old colicky kid, but it's not true at the same time, because that phrase, they'll grow out of it, is incomplete. What we see all the time is they grow out of it into the next iteration of this perfect storm process, right? Because the stressed out, colicky, fussy, refluxy, poorly nursing baby turns into the toddler, or even before that, turns into the 6, the 12-month-old who's got the next iteration of challenges, which usually turns into more head rotation or immune system challenges, right? It's the kiddo who now you've noticed for a couple months, they only look in one direction. Their head is always tilted to the side when they're in the car seat or in their bed. They're always looking one way. And now we've got that flat spot developing. It's called torticollis and plagiocephaly. All right, so now we're into another intervention. We've got the helmets, and now we've got more head molding and cranial stuff to work at. And a lot of times the same kiddo who's dealing with that is one who's starting to have ENT drainage systems, right? We've had babies as young as 4 or 6 months old. They're starting to get ear infections. And so now we've got this drainage issue because we pulled them out by their head and neck, and all of those, that extra tension up top has got that drainage locked in, that we can't let that flow. We can't move it on as we should. And now we get ear infection after ear infection after ear infection after ear infection. But don't worry, they just grow out of that a little bit later, and sometimes grow out of it with the help of tube surgery, right? And now our next iteration pops up where the stressed out, colicky baby turns into the chronic immune system toddler. And now that fluid is going down and into the tonsils, adenoids, into the throat. And we've got mouth breathing issues. We've got swollen tonsils and adenoids, but don't worry about that. We can just chop those off. It's like an IKEA part, right? You get the part, you get the couch, or you get your shelf from IKEA, you take it home, you set up everything, and there's extra parts laying around that you throw away afterwards. That's how your body's made. There's just extra parts. You get to chop them off. No big deal. Hopefully you're picking up the sarcasm font in my voice. But the point is, this doesn't go away. When the same underlying cause remains, it just keeps turning into something else. Usually the next one up is chronic colds, chronic respiratory stuff, bronchitis, pneumonia, asthma, allergies, and other immune system issues. And let me pull this back up again. And the point is, we don't just grow out of it. We don't just get off this fast track. It turns into one thing after the other. And that's usually around that 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old mark. And right around there is when we're getting into school age. And so now these challenges are starting to show up not just as immune system stuff or sleep stuff, but it's that neuro-emotional regulation as well, right? Maybe it's the toddler who's got no leash, right? If one thing goes wrong in their world, they're flying off the handle and their emotional regulation is non-existent. Or it's the kiddo in school who's got a bunch of sensory aversions or issues, doesn't like trying new foods, the tags on the shirts bother them all the time, they can't sit still. All of this, one thing leads to another when their system is stuck in the same stressed out state, when they're stuck in what we'll call that gas pedal, fight or flight, survival mode. Because the more time that goes on, the more developmental windows, the more higher level brain functions are missed. And now we turn into the higher level neurodevelopmental issues. We see exhausted, angry, anxious, depressed teenagers. And ultimately, we're not going to leave you out of this, mom and dad. We've got burnt out, stressed out adults, right? So many of the moms and dads or the adults who take care of it Thrive, they come and they hear this workshop for their kiddos and they're like, wait a minute, that sounds like me. The same nervous system, the same process is taking place. So what is the perfect storm? In a nutshell, it's all of that. But don't feel like, oh, because your kid had one of those boxes not checked, or they didn't deal with this or that this doesn't apply to them. That's not the case at all. What I want you to understand is that the more of this that was present, and the earlier that it happened, the more severe these issues are. It doesn't mean that all of it has to be there. It doesn't even mean that it has to have been there from day one. But we see this golden thread connecting all of it. So what is that golden thread? How are these things so connected? Well, that is what we refer to as our gas versus brake balance. And this quote sums it up so well from Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's one of the leaders in epigenetics and stem cell biology. And he put it this way: you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. If you're in survival mode, if you're in stress, if you're in fight or flight, you can't be in growth and development and wellness mode. The way we put that is what we call our gas pedal versus brake pedal. So there's two modes to your nervous system. It's called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. It's called your autonomic nervous system. But what you can understand it as is gas and brake. Gas pedal is stress. Gas pedal is survival mode. Gas pedal is fight or flight. There's a bear chasing you in the woods and you got to get out of there. That's great for survival. That's great for fight or flight situations, but it's not so great for everyday life. Because when we're stuck in that stress mode, the brake pedal, the other side of things, gets turned off. That growth and development, that wellness, immune system, digestion, higher level brain functions, all of that growth and development mode gets put on the back burner if we're living in survival mode all of the time. So this spectrum is the perfect storm, right? The perfect storm is kiddos who are stuck in that gas pedal, fight or flight stress mode way too early and way too often. When you get stuck in there, all of the future pathways, all of the future development gets put on the back burner. What leads to kids getting into this mode? Well, we talked through the one of them a little bit. We're going to come back to, but I want to let me explain these 3 T's in the middle, and then I want to show you one other concept here. There's 3 T's, that green, blue, and red bubble. It's thoughts, traumas, and toxins. That is what drives us towards that stress mode. It's physical stress. It's physical trauma. It's emotional thoughts. And that's the one that I would say we don't give enough credence to for our kiddos, right? We as adults can think of like, oh, we've got our jobs or our bills or our work stress or our life stress. We think of stress in that terms in our plate. And as the hindsight of being older, of having 2020, perspective, we don't see the things kids are dealing with as issues, right? We know that that's stuff that they're going to look back on and be like, oh, this wasn't a big deal. But in the moment, it's a very big deal, right? In the moment, that kiddo who isn't getting along with their friends at school or is feeling this social emotional pressure, that matters a ton for them. It matters for how they're experiencing the world in that moment. And so it's affecting their development. It's affecting that growth process. And even all the way back to babies, right? It's so simplistic for babies. It's either it's black and white. It's, am I warm? Am I fed? Am I dry? Or am I not, right? It's that simple. They're either good or they're in that stress, fight or flight mode. And then the last one is the chemical and the toxic stress. That is the one that I would say as a whole, most parents are doing a good job of, or at least the ones that end up here, the ones that are seeking all of these answers. You've probably gone gluten and dairy free. You've done a bunch of essential oils and detoxes, and you've done a bunch of other therapies. We know that we shouldn't be using toxins and chemicals in our homes, and you're doing your best to limit that already. And that's good. We should keep doing that. We just see that it's not the root, right? That's kind of it's a factor that's going to push us in a good direction or not. It's not the ultimate underlying why. So this gas versus brake balance is everything. This gas versus brake balance is what sets us on a growth and development trajectory or a stress survival mode trajectory. And that perfect storm pathway is stress. It's a baby who is locked into that fight or flight mode. So how is it that they get stuck in that so early? Let me show you our fuse box poster here. So the way this is set up, you see that brain and that nervous system on the left side, and then there's a column of systems of different organ control centers, and then the symptoms on the right side. Now, this is kind of like a fuse box in your house, right? The fuse to the kitchen blows, the fridge, the oven, the microwave, all that stuff's not going to work. That's the same thing here. There's certain regions of the nervous system that control different functions. So if there's blown fuses or obstructions or stresses there, the downstream is going to look like different things, right? And the one I want you to focus in on is that top of the neck, that vagus nerve, that gas versus brake center. Up here, this is what runs the show. There's a nerve called the vagus nerve, and it is more or less your body's brake pedal. It runs all that calming, growth and development, wellness mode. What do you think gets most stuck and most affected in the birth process? Right up here, right? We get pulled out, turned, twisted by our head and neck, let alone C-section, forceps, vacuum extraction. And that vagus nerve gets a little bit stuck, a little bit locked in. That misalignment and fixation taking place up top leads to our kids stuck in that stress mode because the upper part, that gas pedal, is turned off. So coming back to then that perfect storm process, we see some of these golden threads starting to be pieced together, right? We see that it really isn't as siloed or as separate as maybe traditional medicine makes it seem, because when you're dealing with these things, when you're going through this stuff, if you've lived it, you know, okay, well, we got the GI system specialist for the reflux and the feeding issues. And we've got, as they grow up, there's an ENT for the tube surgery or the ear stuff. And then there's OT and speech for some of the neurodevelopmental challenges. And there's a PT for the helmet. And there's all these different things. And there's we need those specialists, but really it's all connected by the same underlying why. We're limited internally, right? Our internal operating system, the stuff that runs the show, the system that controls every single function in our body, is stuck in stress. And if we unlock that, well, then all the downstream stuff is able to take care of itself. So here's a question we get a lot. What about genetics? What about Their genes. What about our default centers? Now that if it's cut off a little bit by the picture, that says this is the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, and it's talking about the interaction of genes and environment and what their research has shown. And this is an amazing site. I'd highly recommend going and hanging out, spending some time. If you're a science nerd like me, who enjoys understanding this, go to that Harvard Center on the Developing Child page. And listen, after this workshop, you're going to read all that stuff and you're going to have the same impression I did, which is these people are talking about pediatric chiropractic. They just don't know it. They just don't know that we do what they are looking for, because what they're showing and what they're seeing is that toxic stress, environmental things that happen to us, not the genetics, weaken the genetics. It affects and it impacts the architecture of the brain. It affects that structure in their default settings that changes that future trajectory. So yes, our genes matter a little bit. It's like the deck of cards we're dealt, but the cards you play, the hand of cards that you get to choose to put out, that is your lifestyle choices. That is the epigenetic factors, the things that are outside of your genetic control. Because reality is, I think in the 50s or the 60s, when the genome was first discovered, we thought that within a couple of decades, we would have this mastered. We thought that if we could figure out the genetic code, if we could piece everything together, we'd never have a health challenge again, because we could just decode the genetics for it. Obviously, we're sicker than ever, right? That's not the case, because what we found out is that it's not the genes, it's the environment, it's the toxic stress that turns genes on or turns genes off. So as you see on their graph here, in that first year of life, sensory pathways, language, even the higher cognitive function, the majority of our synapses, the majority of our brain development is happening in those first 12 months. Those early susceptible periods are everything for kids. So I want to, before moving on, I want to point out two things with that. One, that takeaway should be, okay, we need to be super, super proactive with how early we're getting our kids on the right track. And yes, that is 100% true. But I have a feeling that most of you listening here are probably past that point, right? I'm willing to bet your kids are in that 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12, 16-year-old range. And you might look at that and think, shoot, I missed it. I dropped the ball. And please don't look at it from that perspective. Yes, those early times matter so much, and those windows are more available early on, but don't think that just because your kid's not in that season anymore, that they can't change. It's just that sooner the better, right? We'll get through that a little bit at the end too, is the closer we can get to the start of life to intervene and to help some of these issues, the higher the potential, the higher the ceiling for full, unlimited health is. So let's jump into this next thing here. What is this perfect storm algorithm? I hinted at that a second ago and explained it briefly, but let me explain a little bit more in depth of how do we figure out what somebody needs. Well, there's two main variables. It's how much stress they're dealing with. And then especially based on that last graph, it's when it starts, right? So it's how much of those 3 T's are taking place, and then how early did it happen? Because the earlier this shows up, right? The kiddo who was dealing with this super stressed out pregnancy that then had a lot of birth intervention and was struggling from minute 1, that gas pedal mode is way more locked in than the kid who maybe was looking pretty chill that first year of life. And then some ear infection started, or then some other speech delays or other stuff crept up down the road. Those are very different situations. And so then the care plan, the frequency, the game plan of what we need to create a different path for them looks a little bit different. And that's what we're going to explain here as we go on. What does that care plan look like? How do we undo these stresses and challenges? How do we get out of gas pedal mode, pump the brakes, and help our kids chill out? All right. I promised I would answer a question for you. We said, what the heck does chiropractic have to do with any of these issues? What the heck would an adjustment do for a kiddo dealing with ear infections or emotional regulation or anxiety or sensory processing disorder? Well, I want you to think of it as this way. A shift in the spine means the stress system is locked on. So that birth trauma or your kiddo being a kid and living life, when they get locked in, when there's those falls, bumps, bruises, turns and twists of life, that shift in the spine leads to that nervous system stress stuck in gas pedal mode. And that is 100% what we have to do with. That is where we get to intervene, and we get to, through an adjustment, pump the brakes on all of that, get them back in growth and development and optimal wellness mode. So how does that actually work, right? Maybe you're someone who is like, yep, got it. Let's move on. I want the next step. Can I get my kid scanned already? yes, you can turn off the video and come back in 20 minutes and I'll explain how that works, or 5 minutes, however long it's going to be. But I know there's people out there who want to know, like me, and say like, okay, explain more, right? How does an adjustment do that? How does that shift in the spine lead to that gas pedal mode locked in? And that's what I promised that we will walk through too, right? That's what we're going to go through. 4 super simple D words. They sound really confusing, and it's going to be but you don't have to remember any single one of them. I promise there's not a quiz when you come in. These 4 D words are going to explain how we get to the bottom of this and how we see all of this stuff connected. So let me explain one more concept as we get into that. Here's another quiz. The function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all of their cells. What jumps out to you as a parent or as a provider in that sentence? I'll pretend that you're pausing and you're waiting, you're looking through a few words. I'll tell you the ones that we get when we're talking in person and we're doing this workshop live. The one that people see and they jump to first is behavior. We hear that behavior component and we're like, yep, that's the one. Because what do we all need help with? It's our kids' behavior. That's the reason you're tuning in. Is there some sort of output or behavior issue that you don't like? And that maybe is behavior in a true sense of the word, of a emotional regulation behavior, a acting out in school, a focus or something like that. But that behavior could also mean the latching, the nursing, the reflux, like all those early challenges too. There's some sort of thing happening. And I get it. That's what we need to address as parents, or that's what we want to see change. But it's not the root, right? If we go backtrack, where does that behavior come from? That starts from the coordination, which really is through the perception. So our nervous system first is taking in everything here, and then it coordinates, it brings that information in, it integrates it, it thinks through it, evaluates, and then the behavior happens. So this concept is everything. It's the most important thing to understand, is that these output issues are an input issue. When we don't have the right brain information coming in, we've got no chance of the right actions, behavior, output happening on the other side of that. And that's why, as much as we joked about earlier that we don't like these labels and these names, if there was one that I would have to agree summarizes everything and you could probably tack on as a co-diagnosis for any other challenge your kid's dealing with, it's sensory processing disorder, because sensory processing issues are really at the root of all of this. When we can't properly take information in, we got zero chance of the right information going out on the other side. So that's what we want to talk through, is why is the sensory information so impacted from all of this? All right, first D word here that you don't have to remember, don't stress, is dyskinesia. Dyskinesia means misalignment and fixation. It means something's stuck. It means you take a sledgehammer, you bang it into the door hinge, and that hinge isn't able to open and close as it should. Maybe it moves a little bit, but it's kind of stuck. It tracks in a weird direction. This one is where we got to start, because the root of that dyskinesia is all too often the birth process. So let me put a little disclaimer out here for this next little video clip. It's short, it's only a handful of seconds, but it's a C-section delivery. So if you're someone who is a little squeamish, right, there's not blood and guts and everything squirting out here, but it's a reality of how a kid enters the world via C-section delivery. And if that's going to make you uncomfortable, please just look away for a second. But this is an important thing to grasp, an important thing to understand. And even parents who've been through this don't sometimes realize what all is involved. So let's take a little glance here. What happens with that C-section delivery? Done this workshop a lot of times. I've seen other people do it a lot. I've watched this video countless times, and it makes me cringe. It makes me squirm every single time, because that is an insane amount of force going into that fragile newborn's head and neck. And I don't know if you could really hear it based on, some background noise here outside, or how well the microphone was picking up that computer sound. But did you hear what was going on in the background of that OR? They're just kind of whistling there. They're just chilling. This isn't like some traumatic emergency thing. This is a relaxed, run-of-the-mill C-section delivery. We were doing this once, and there was it wasn't me presenting. It was Dr. Tony was there working with their office. And in the presentation, an anesthesiologist pops in or raises hand at this moment. And we talked afterwards. We were like, oh crap, is this going to get a little bit ugly? Is this going to get controversial? But it went the opposite direction. His perspective, as the person who's in that room all day, every day, was that this is nothing, right? He's like, oh, that's no big deal. Like that's a run of that's just an everyday occurrence for us. That's not any extra trauma or severity. The point is, our kids are dealing with a lot of force at birth, right? There's no way in the world that you would let anyone do that to your newborn afterwards, right? If someone was even holding them by their head and neck a couple minutes after they were born, you would lose their mind on them. But somehow in the birth process, we suck a vacuum cleaner to their head and yank, turn, twist, and pull them out from there, and then not realize that there's going to be damage done. Like we already said, don't hear this as me saying like our providers are bad people. It's just they don't realize that there is consequences. There's an impact that is made with these things. And we need to get proactive in undoing that damage that's done. So you've heard a lot of graphs, you've seen a lot of charts, I'm sure, as you've gone throughout time. And you've done your own research as far as like, oh, when all these red dye 40s and GMOs and Monsanto and all these toxins have entered the environment, that's when we've seen our kids struggling more. And those are all true, right? Those are all a piece of the puzzle. Like we said, those three T's, thoughts, traumas, and toxins. But there's one that we're not looking for, right? We're not realizing that this birth is smack dab in the middle of that. Because take a look here. That C-section rate on that far left side back in the 70s was down below 10%, 6%, 3, 5. That's what it should be. As time goes on, this chart stops in 2012. And it was at 33%. The most recent stats from births here in Pittsburgh, most hospitals are around 40. Some are even up at 45% C-section delivery. And that's crazy. But don't feel like, oh, if you didn't end up at a C-section, this doesn't apply to you, because the majority of those other births are being intervened with as well, right? There's almost nothing that is allowed to take place with just mama and baby calling the shots. It's always intervention. It's always things getting in the way. Even if it's just a vaginal delivery with that hands turning, pulling, and twisting, I've seen that so many times lead to a lot of issues for our kiddos. So yes, it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. All right. So you might be wondering, does this matter, right? Is this even an impact? There's two studies here that I want to quickly explain. One of them is showing an increased risk of autism in children whose mothers experience birth complications. As much as collectively we're missing this, we're not realizing there's a connection between these topics. We're starting to, right? We're starting to do some more research. We're starting to connect the dots between early start to life struggles and future complications down the road. And that's what this study was doing here. They found a significant higher rate of autism in mothers whose births had different complications. And then the other one on the right, which might have the video in the way, says 99 out of 100 healthy newborns had stress in the spine at birth. That's what this study was doing. It was a group of osteopaths actually in Europe, and they took 100 healthy newborns. These weren't kids dealing with colic, reflux, all these other issues that we are struggling with. They were normal, right? Normal, healthy deliveries, nothing going on. And they found that 99 out of 100 of them had some sort of abnormality, some sort of misalignment or fixation, our fancy D word, dyskinesia, going on from birth onwards. So yes, this is incredibly commonplace, and it's all too normal for our world. So what does that lead to? We got that fixation and misalignment, and that leads to the next step, which is what we call disafferentation. That misalignment and fixation sends stress to the brain. Let's talk a little bit about how the brain works. There's a couple different modes. The brain food is what we call it. And the good stuff is proprioception. That's sensory input. That's how you can close your eyes and touch your elbow, because your body has an awareness of itself in space. Your brain is never at rest. I know a lot of wives try to claim that their husbands don't actually have brains that function. Sorry, it's not true. Our brains are always doing stuff. They're taking in all of the sensory information. And the majority of our body's sensory input comes from the spine, which makes sense, right? If we know where our spine is, if we know where our core and our torso is, you can kind of piece together the rest. You know, your arms and legs are attached to that. So it's the starting point. But not only is the majority of that sensory input coming from the spine, the majority of that comes from right up here. There are so many sensory receptors in the top part of the neck, because your body has to know how your eyes are positioned. It has to know how our head is. It's pretty amazing that we can walk on 2 feet, right? We're the only mammals that really do that. And so that eyes being level with horizon is a huge, huge part of that. All of these sensory receptors and input then are the most vulnerable thing in that birth process. When we get stuck, we get locked in anywhere, but especially up here, we get stuck into that stress mode. And that's what we call nociception. Nociception is noise, that's stress bombarding the brain. I'm going to show you here in a minute that we actually have scans that can measure and quantify what is that stress level coming to the brain. How much is that input getting in and throwing off those kiddos? But what it leads to is that stress mode gets stuck on. Instead of the nice normal brain food, we get bombarded with SOS signals. Just like if we were, having this conversation sitting in the office, we had nice, calming elevator music going on versus Metallica. If we had Metallica blaring from the speakers, we couldn't understand, we couldn't hear, we couldn't interact with each other. That is what's going on in a kiddo who is dealing with this extra nociceptive stress, which of course then, if we've got all this extra stuff bombarding our brain, well, no wonder they can't regulate their emotions. No wonder they can't sit still in math class because they're just going at 100 miles an hour when they're just chilling, sitting, relaxing. So we've got all this input, and what happens is that it gets stuck on. Nerves that fire together, wire together. The more ingrained these pathways get, the more they become the default mode, and those repeated signals sort of sensitize the brain for stress. It becomes easier to go to that stress mode, and it becomes the default mode. It becomes their hardwired settings. So what happens next? We have dyskinesia, misalignment and fixation, leading to that bad brain input called disafferentation. And now we've got dysautonomia. What we could call that is just an imbalance in the autonomic nervous system. That might be a new word for you, that autonomic nervous system, or ANS. But I've actually got good news. That's something you're an expert in, because we just spent the last 10 or 20 minutes, however long it's been, talking about that. The autonomic nervous system is the gas versus brake balance. It's that sympathetic versus parasympathetic tone. And what happens is that gets skewed, that gets pushed towards that gas pedal stress mode when we have this constant stress and nociception bombarding us. Let's come back to that vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve is the brake pedal. The vagus nerve is the upper part of the neck that comes out and does almost all of those calming, rest, relaxation, digestion, immune system functions throughout our body. This is one of the missing pieces as to why that upper neck is so important and why birth trauma is so impactful, because that vagus nerve gets turned off. So at the same time that we are cutting the brake pedal, we are ramping up the gas pedal. It's like we've got a Lamborghini engine and a bicycle pedal brakes. But this is also the key as to why detox, nutrition, environmental changes can't really be the only answer. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by that. It's important. I want you to care about what you put in your kid's body. I want you to limit the stuff that their environment is exposed to. And like you've probably experienced, if you've gone down that path, it makes a difference, right? You've maybe seen changes, you've seen improvements with your kids, but they get stuck, they plateau, they flatline, and that those improvements seem to stop. That's because it's not the underlying root issue, right? It's part of it, but it's not the underlying why. Because no matter how good of nutrition or fuel or food you put into your body, if it can't be broken down, processed, and taken in, well, you got no chance of it being as useful as it should be, right? We've got no chance of your body making the most of it. So what we see, and that's what this study is laying out, it's talking about the vagal innervation of the gut and the immune system, where that phrase of the gut-brain connection you hear people talk about really should be flipped. It should be the brain-gut connection, because that's the starting point. If this vagus nerve is off, we've got no chance of all of those digestive processes working as it should. The study was pretty cool. They took rats, they fed them the same thing, the same environment, the same everything that they were experiencing. One of them, they disconnected that vagus nerve, and the other one, they left it intact. And man, the ones that they took the vagus nerve wiring pathways off of, they were a wreck. Immune system challenges, gut and digestive challenges, like none of it could make a difference when that vagus nerve innervation wasn't at the peak of what it's supposed to be doing. So here's another one, that vagus nerve control over sensory issues. Remember how we said the sensory processing disorder is really the root of all of these input or all of these output issues, because we don't have the right input coming in. Well, here we see that vagal tone is affected in sensory kiddos. And what they found is that sensory processing disorder, kiddos struggling with that, had a lower vagus nerve activity than kiddos who didn't have any sensory symptoms. And to make it even more significant, the spectrum of challenges, right? More severe kiddos versus less severe issues. The ones with the most severe struggles had the most impacted vagal nerve activity. It was the decreased the most. And a little foreshadowing here, this research, that study, the way they were assessing the vagus nerve, it's the same technology that we use here at Thrive to assess your vagus nerve, to assess that gas versus brake balance. And then we get to see it change. We get to see it improve and come back online as we go throughout care. So like I already said, the summary here is that when we have that stress coming into the brain, we get stuck in gas pedal with no brakes. We get stuck in survival mode. So hopefully you're following along here, that these output issues are the result of an input issue, right? Garbage in means garbage out. We correct the input, we correct the output then. And that's really what our final D is talking about. It's the abnormal energy output, or dyskinesis. We have a few different terminologies that we use for that. There's raging bull, there's drunken bull, and then there's this combination. Really, that is just different scan patterns that we'll see show up and how it manifests in them. Because like we talked through, that fuse box poster, we see different regions of the nervous system controlling different functions. We get to measure that. We get to track and quantify everything. And so that's really what I want to wrap up with. I want to explain what these scans are. I want to give you a few quick case study examples of how that shows up in a kiddo's life. And then the most important part, like we said, the action steps. So technology, man, technology drives everything we do. I can't imagine practicing without it. I remember sitting in the exam room one time, talking about a patient's scans, and she asked me, why don't all chiropractors do that? And I kind of had to laugh to myself, because I honestly do not know. I can't imagine practicing without some way to objectively track and monitor not just our symptoms, not just the downstream secondary stuff, but how that actual body is functioning and what is causing these struggles on the inside. So that's really what we get to do. Step one, when you are a patient at Thrive, is let's take a benchmark. Let's take an initial reading of where you're at. And then throughout that care plan, we get to stay updated. We get to see what's changing and make sure we're staying on track. So the best way to explain that is through examples. Let's talk about this little dude. He, when we first met him, was a 2-year-old dealing with a ton of ear infections. They reached out after, I think it was 6 consecutive rounds of antibiotics, and then it went away, and it was back the next week, and back and forth and back and forth. So he was a wreck. Emotions were a wreck. And what we saw in his scans was a ton of stress in that upper part of the neck. Scanning 101 real quick here. The old one is on the left here. And what we're looking for is white. White means normal. Green, blue, or red is mild, moderate, severe stress. What do you see? That severe tension right at the top of his neck. Well, we just talked about, right, that ENT, immune system, overall wellness centers are rooted up here. So when we're stuck, when we're locked in, it's not that a kiddo's eustachian tubes are too horizontal, like we'll hear from a lot of people. It's that tension is locked in, right? Because these aren't hollow drain pipes that we just tip them downwards and all the fluid drains out and there's no issues. This is a tube of toothpaste. You got to squeeze the fluid out and push that out. So when we're so tense and locked in up here because of that stress in the spine and the nervous system, well, we can't have that drainage working. That tension gets the eustachian tube stuck and that fluid gets stuck, and then drainage never gets to happen. So what do we lead to? Ear infections. Fast forward a couple months into care for him, and what do we see? That scan on the right doesn't have any of that green, blue, or red anymore, right? It's looking amazing. It's looking all clear. And life for him was amazing too. He's actually still with us here. I think just turned 4. He's a little bit younger than my oldest. And we still are going strong without any ear infection. So he's doing so well. And it's not just that, right? It's not just, oh, this was a fix for ear infections. It's that whole future trajectory of what that perfect storm pathway was going to be like gets to be turned around and flipped for him. So that's the younger side, right? There's chronic immune system toddler challenges. What else do we got? Here's a story of Claire. Claire was more in the midst of that perfect storm world, where as a baby, this is her as I think 9 years old, but as a baby, she had all sorts of trouble with those early issues, right? Latching, colic, reflux, nursing, like none of it was good. And that led to ear infections for her. Here's a school-age girl at this point. She was stressed and anxious all the time, struggled with dyslexia, couldn't focus, wasn't really into sports because she was not super coordinated or didn't really have good balance. And her mom was wiped. She was sick of trying. She didn't want to go the medication route, and she tried everything else. She tried essential oils. She tried all these other interventions, and they hadn't really moved the needle. They hadn't gotten the changes they needed to with Claire. And so they pretty much had nowhere else to turn. So we came in, we got started with Claire. And what was her initial scan like? You see the number there on the bottom, 242. That should be 100. 100 is the baseline. Hers was almost 2.5 times that. That means that the brain input was 2.5 times normal. So she's dealing with all sorts of that Metallica, all sorts of that nociception, overwhelming brain bombardment information when she's just trying to sit in class and relax and read or focus on all sorts of stuff. So what happened for Claire? Let's walk through those 4 Ds, right? An adjustment unlocks that misalignment and fixation. It pumps the brakes on the nervous system so that the brain is able to properly perceive things again, which calms that stress response and allows for that optimal expression of health. We have that brain-body connection again. And what comes from that? That total energy partway through her care plan had dropped almost 100 points down to a way more normal range for her, where she was dealing just a little bit more than normal. And then life for her, right? I know that's what you care about as parents. You don't want to see what the scans look like. You want to see what changed in her life. Well, here's a little screenshot of what her mom had shared early on in that process, where ADHD, vision, her overall wellness, and even stuff that they weren't expecting, like food intolerances. She had a bunch of food allergies that all of a sudden started going away. All of that had major improvements. She, went from being stuck in vision therapy to all of a sudden skyrocketing out of nowhere and graduating through that. And everything was back on track to what it should be. So that's Claire's journey, Claire's story. And then last one, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. This was a kiddo who was past high school. He's making that transition to college, was super stressed about it because school was not his favorite thing. He was going to the culinary school route, and he wasn't really looking forward to getting back into books and all of that. Dealt with anxiety, dealt with ADHD. And at this point, when we met him, was on medications to help calm some of that stuff out. On the far left, that's his first scan. Look how balanced it is, right? We just said color is stress, and that's got a lot more white than Claire's did, especially starting on. And that's what happens when we get to those early stages, when we maybe have already done medications or we've done some certain things, is it hides and it buffers those challenges. Nothing changed medication wise for him early on here, but look at that next check-in, those progress scans along the way. That was his reality coming to the surface, right? Once we had to wake up that dormant, stressed out, locked in nervous system, his reality started to show up, which was a whole lot of stress, a whole lot of chaos on the inside. Before then, at the end of the road for him, that more balanced, more clear scan returned. And that's when life was way different for him. He handled that transition to school so well. He was thriving with it. He was getting straight A's for the first time in his life, was able to focus, able to do what he was supposed to do. So that was my point, where we talked about earlier. Hey, don't stress if you're past that first year of life and you feel like you missed the boat. Here's almost 20 years old, and we're able to unlock and get this kiddo back on track in an amazing sort of way. So I know there's always a couple questions that people have as we're wrapping up here. So let me try to preemptively answer a few of those, and then we'll get to those action steps, right? One is, how long does it take? Well, I can't really answer that for you because I've got a lot of corny chiropractor dad jokes like the scans dictate the plans, or we don't guess, we test, that really are at the root of that, right? We can't tell you without those scans, but a range of what you can expect, at a minimum, anyone who's coming in the office, we're usually talking about a 2 to 3 month sort of game plan. When we're talking perfect storm, longer term challenges, that's usually closer to 6 to 8 months at multiple visits a week to start unlocking that gas pedal mode and getting them back on track. We've got a whole care plan algorithm that's way more in depth than those 2 slides that we had shared, that takes all of the lifestyle factors that we'll talk through, all of the scan findings into consideration, and lets us build out a roadmap to how we can do that. But you'll see here on the left side, in those younger ages, the brain has an almost unlimited ability to change, to make a difference, to improve. As time goes on, as that age increases, it takes a lot of work, right? It takes so much more effort to make those changes. So that's where the earlier the better is really the mantra I encourage parents is, let's get these kiddos unlocked from day one, from minute one, from as soon as you find out this information, rather than saying, oh, that's good to know, maybe we'll revisit that at some point down the road, right? Other FAQ is, what do these scans actually measure? Well, I don't want to go too in depth if you're not wanting to, hear all the nerdy info. Happy to go there if you want to. But there's three basic things. There's thermography or paraspinal temperature readings. There's what's called heart rate variability. That's that gas versus brake balance, measuring the vagus nerve. And then the last one is called surface electromyography. That is measuring how much energy does our brain spend when it's just at rest, when it's just relaxing. But like I said, if you want to dig into that more, you can call the office, and in that complimentary consultation, we can absolutely walk through more of that too. So finally, what are those action steps? One, man, I am so thankful that you are listening here, because it tells me, like I said, that you care about your family. Don't stop looking for answers. Keep seeking out help. Keep not accepting the status quo, not accepting that they'll just grow out of it or this is their normal as an okay thing for your child, because it's not. We got to start with that hope, right? That's the first thing we were talking about today. And hopefully, if you're paying attention, if you're following along here, you can also put together the pieces of like, okay, these 3 T's that we shared, those thoughts, traumas, and toxins, they're not helping. They're pushing us towards that gas pedal mode. Honestly, we don't talk about that a whole lot at Thrive for a couple reasons. One, remember we talked about how you call here and you're saying, welcome to your last resort. Most people are already doing that, right? Most people are already showing up at Thrive, and they've got the detoxes, they've got the oils, they've got everything cleaned out, and they are doing better for it, but still struggling. But also, you can find that information on Dr. Google, right? That is one of the good things about the accessibility of information online, is you can find that elsewhere. Because what we really want to focus on, and what I know your biggest question is number 3, is what about getting your child scanned? Let me stop our screen share again. And so that's the question I know that is at the root of every parent listening is this what's going on? Is this stress? Is this gas pedal mode? Is this survival mode locked into their system? And is that why they're limited? Is that why they're not able to reach their full potential? Honestly, I wish I could answer that just now, like via Zoom, via video recording, but I can't, right? I can't really tell you, is that what's at play or not? What I can tell you is that I'd love to find out, right? I cannot sleep at night if I didn't give you at least opportunity to see if that's what's going on. I'm willing to bet you've had your kids' eyes, ears, nose, throat, heart, lungs. I'm willing to bet you've had all that stuff checked. But have you ever had their central nervous system, the things that runs the show, evaluated? At Thrive, that's what we do best. That's what the scans are for that we've talked about a bunch here. And that's what I'd love to give you the opportunity to set up for your family, for your kiddo. We make that as easy as possible. We'll set up a complimentary consultation for you just to answer, ask any questions, get answers you're looking for. And then if you want to, dig straight into those scans and find out what is happening on the inside. We'll give you a little gift certificate as a thank you here for listening. So make sure if you're calling in, if you're messaging, if you're filling out the email form online, mention that you tuned in this webinar. We'll give you a $50 gift certificate off of that process to make it as easy as possible for you, because we really want the best for your kiddos. Hopefully you've gotten that figured out by now, that we are here to help your family thrive. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know if you've gotten any other thoughts or questions along that. And man, I'm just so looking forward to meeting your family in the office here soon and helping your family thrive. Have a great one, guys.